The hallways of Caligula's palace didn't echo with political discussions. They echoed with people begging for mercy. Under his leadership, Rome's wealthy and powerful people discovered a new kind of terror. A terror where fathers were pushed to sell the innocence of their own daughters, and husbands were forced to clap while their wives were embarrassed, as if it were some twisted theater show. This wasn't random craziness. It was on purpose. A planned system where cruelty wasn't unusual. It was an everyday routine. All of it written down in official records, listed like any boring expense of the empire. Every horror had a price, a record number, and a set of rules. And through this system, the greatest empire of the ancient world bowed before a machine of organized evil. To understand how Rome reached that point, we have to go back to the moment a smiling young man was celebrated as Rome's great hope. Before we dive deeper into this fall, make sure to help this small channel grow. Hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss any of our darker history explorations. Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, known to the world as Caligula because of the little soldier boots he wore as a child, was the beloved son of a popular Roman general. His rise to power was welcomed like a miracle. People celebrated for a full 100 days. To the crowds, he represented the continuation of a legendary family line. Senators finally relaxed after the suffocating fear of Emperor Tiberius. Nobody imagined that this charming, well-educated, likable young man would become the mastermind behind the most organized system of moral corruption Rome would ever see. His early years were a mix of privilege and trauma. He was raised among soldiers, loved by the legions who worshipped his father. But he also witnessed the darker side of imperial politics, the suspicious death of Germanicus, likely through poison, and the destruction of his own family. His mother, Agrippina the Elder, was exiled. His older brothers were executed or locked away. Caligula survived by playing a part, harmless, foolish, and non-threatening. Growing up in Tiberius's palace taught him an important lesson. In Rome, survival depended on lying, and he became a master at pretending. When he first took the throne, everything looked promising. He cut taxes, released political prisoners, put on spectacular public games, improved roads and buildings, built water systems, repaired major roads, and rewarded the legions. Rome loved him. Women threw flowers in his path. Children sang songs praising him. Senators, the same men who would later shake at hearing his footsteps, fought for moments of his attention. It felt like Rome's golden age had finally arrived after years trapped under Tiberius's fear-driven rule. The difference was amazing. Where Tiberius isolated himself on Capri, Caligula walked openly among the people, joined public celebrations, and even shared meals with senators. He appeared friendly, generous, and almost godlike in his popularity. The people truly believed the gods had finally given them the perfect ruler. Then everything changed. In the autumn of 37, a mysterious sickness struck him down. He spent weeks on the edge of death. Court doctors wrote about fevers hotter than they thought a human could survive. Violent shaking that required multiple men to hold him still, and confused episodes where he claimed he was speaking directly with Jupiter himself. Rome was frozen with fear. Priests sacrificed endlessly to the gods. Some citizens promised their own lives if it meant saving the emperor. And when he finally opened his eyes, something fundamental inside him was different. The first sign was almost subtle. He ordered that every statue of every god in Rome should have its head replaced with his own likeness. After that, the shift became impossible to ignore. People say a person's body reveals the truth long before their words do. And Caligula's body, after that illness, told a story of something deeply disturbing. His eyes, which were once lively and warm, turned hollow and predatory, the pupils unnaturally wide. He developed constant sleeplessness, wandering the palace through the night, whispering to statues, speaking to the moon, and responding to unseen enemies. Servants often found him at dawn, naked in the palace gardens, covered in dirt, claiming he had been planting Rome's destiny. But what he planted wasn't the future. It was the foundation for his descent into something much darker. It started within his own household, with his sisters, Drusilla, Julia Livilla, and Agrippina the Younger. They were no longer just his family. They became the first victims of what would turn into a government policy. His obsession with Drusilla was the most extreme. He called her his Diana. He treated her as if she were his empress in public events, seating her in places reserved only for imperial wives. When Drusilla died in 38, Caligula spiraled into a frantic rage. He ordered an official mourning period so strict that laughter, bathing, and even family meals were forbidden. Anyone who showed happiness was executed. But his grief wasn't love. It was the fury of someone who felt his ownership had been stolen by death itself. With Drusilla gone, his attention shifted to his remaining sisters and then to the daughters and wives of Rome's wealthy families. This is where the system truly began. Caligula forced noble women to participate in acts with senators, while he watched from a specially made golden throne, taking notes on who seemed eager, who hesitated, and who simply tried to be polite. These notes were later used as political leverage. A senator who behaved enthusiastically toward Julia Livilla suddenly began supporting every imperial order without question. Another, who showed reluctance, found his young son missing and days later returned to him harmed forever, castrated as a warning. The signal was clear. In Caligula's Rome, neutrality didn't exist. Everyone could be turned into either an offender or a victim, often both. Roman physician Lucius Scriba left behind writings, hidden for centuries in a villa near Pompeii, detailing how Caligula forced him to examine noble women and girls, checking their fertility and their ability to endure repeated use. These examinations were humiliating, performed in front of the emperor himself, who asked invasive, degrading questions about each woman's body. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. It was organized, bureaucratic, executed with the same precision as a census. Rates and fees were standardized. Caligula had transformed personal evil into a government structure, a machine designed to crush dignity, eliminate resistance, and turn Rome's nobility into obedient instruments of his power. 16 tertios for a night with a senator's wife, 2,000 for his virgin daughter, 5,000 if you wanted both at once. The payments didn't disappear into private pockets. They were logged straight into the imperial treasury, dressed up as voluntary contributions for the good of the state. The palace itself became what Caligula insisted on calling a temple of divine service, and he meant it literally. This was no metaphorical rebranding. He redesigned rooms, hallways, and rituals to function like a religious machine. Each chamber had a name and a function. There was the Room of Jupiter, a space used for the emperor's ritualized abuses, where he cast himself as a living god and gave his favors. There was the Chamber of Venus, staged for forced ceremonies that made noble women participate in recreations of mythic scenes. There was even a hall associated with Priapus, where acts of humiliation were carried out against those the emperor chose. Caligula hired artists to create fancy paintings to decorate these spaces. The stone halls that had once hosted debates about war and law now echoed to very different sounds, and the men who had built Rome, the senators, were made to walk those same hallways to hear what happened and remain silent. The system was intricate beyond imagination, remain silent. The system was detailed beyond imagination. First in the chain were senators' wives, drafted into what the emperor called the imperial cult. They followed schedules, wore specific uniforms, sheer Syrian silks so thin they were virtually ceremonial, and performed rituals according to strict timetables. Next came daughters, Girls as young as 12 were slowly brought into the system under the pretense of divine instruction, but Caligula didn't stop at humiliation. A set of secret memos describe what amounted to a program of selective breeding. Women judged most fertile were forced to bear children destined to be raised as imperial dependents, children separated from their fathers and trained from infancy to serve court needs. Every conception, every birth, every infant death was written in the records. Many pregnancies ended in desperate attempts to prevent childbirth, a sad statistic recorded by scribes. Men were also not exempt. Caligula ordered the feminization of the sons of wealthy houses, dressing them in see-through saffron tunics, painting their faces with white lead and red, teaching them to move and gesture in ways he found pleasing. These boys were paraded at banquets and auctioned for the night. The emperor's involvement was rarely about desire, it was about domination. Each act, each public violation, was a deliberate political statement. Nothing is sacred that I cannot defile. No tradition is safe from my touch. No family is immune from collapse. Perhaps the most savage innovation was how he enlisted families in their own ruin. Many parents were forced not just to witness, but to help, torchbearers in processions, signatories on contracts consenting to the service of their wives and daughters. The Senate was pressed to pass laws that cloaked abuse with religious legitimacy. One such law declared the emperor's body sacred, framing any union with him as a form of worship. It was a legal structure built to make the emperor's violations seem holy. Caligula discovered a cruelty beyond physical force, forced cooperation. He didn't only attack families from the outside, he turned them into instruments of their own destruction. Senator Cornelius is a case in point. When summoned to hand over his wife Libya, he stood up in the Senate and refused. It was a public act of defiance, brave but fatal in its consequences. The next morning, Cornelius's 8-year-old son was discovered on the Senate steps, mutilated, alive and bearing an unmistakable message carved into his flesh. The warning worked. That afternoon, Cornelius delivered Libya to the emperor. Months later, when she conceived by imperial decree, Cornelius was forced to recognize the child as the legitimate heir, abandoning any claims from his other offspring. Humiliation was made law. The Senate voted unanimously that any child of the emperor, of whatever origin, outranked sons born in lawful marriages. Running this system required an administration that rivaled Rome's civil government. Hidden clerks kept detailed records in a sealed archive beneath the Palatine. Each file followed a template: victim's name, age, social rank, physical description, acts performed, duration, degree of apparent cooperation, resulting pregnancies, fees paid, physicians who examined the women, records of injury or illness, midwives present at forced births, guards who escorted them on set schedules, and accountants who counted revenues. Yes, the emperor charged for these services, and the money flowed into imperial coffers. Hundreds of people became cogs in this machine. There were prosecutors of propriety, caretakers of ritual clothing, official midwives, the scribes who wrote the lists, guards who enforced the timetables, and accountants who balanced the books. The spreading of responsibility made it easier for individuals to avoid moral ownership. Nobody stood alone as the monster. Everyone could claim they were merely fulfilling a role. Certain nights were ritualized as spectacles. Full moons were prime time. Caligula staged lunar fertility rites in a converted private amphitheater, turning it into a staged pagan temple. He arranged matches with carefully selected participants, gladiators famed for their strength, Nubian captives brought from the empire's frontiers, even animals on occasion. Creatures like trained bears or Molossian mastiffs, and once a leopard, presented as a royal gift. Husbands sat in the galleries in their senatorial togas, forced to maintain composure while their wives were degraded below them. The emperor orchestrated every detail like a ringmaster, deciding pairings, numbers, duration, even body positioning, using a gilded baton topped with phallic symbols to indicate his choices. Scribes documented everything: names, events, timings, and notably, performative episodes. What played out was less chaos than a theater of dominance, an institution where human suffering was converted into showmanship and then turned into money. An entire shadow economy grew up around the palace's needs. Vendors sold ointments and eye washes claimed to ease pain. Secret pharmacies supplied drugs to end pregnancies. Tutors taught young survivors how to fake cooperation. Doctors opened practices focused on repair and reconstruction. Everyone who touched the system charged a fee. Everyone who touched it profited, and that profit is what made it so durable. Greed helped cooperation. Vanity, fear, ambition all became reasons to look away, to obey, to participate. The horror was not simply that Caligula could commit atrocities, it was that he built a society where atrocity paid. All of Rome became tangled in the crime. Merchants who sold luxurious goods knew exactly where the sudden fortunes of senatorial families came from. Income traced back to payments for silence and participation. Priests offered blessings for unions everyone knew had been forced. Poets wrote flowery verses that turned state-sanctioned horrors into mythic glories. The official histories never reported what the human bodies in the palace lived through, but those bodies told their own stories. Scars formed like a private alphabet of pain. Bellies swelled with pregnancies. Women tried to hide beneath layered garments. Faces stopped smiling. The facial muscles of joy weakened from years of disuse. There was Valeria, the daughter of a senator, who after months of ongoing abuse fell entirely silent. Doctors confirmed her vocal cords worked. She didn't lack the ability to speak. She had simply lost the language to describe what she endured. Her silence spread through the other victims like a disease. They would not meet her eyes because in them they saw a reflection of the fate awaiting them. Caligula's obsessions evolved into ritualized cruelties. He took twisted satisfaction in making mothers watch damage done to their daughters, then reversing roles to force mothers into the very acts inflicted on their children, all while narrating the scene as though reciting poetry. This was not random cruelty. It was a warped doctrine. By destroying motherly love, childhood innocence, and paternal honor, he believed he was unmaking the moral foundations that had held Rome together. In his mind, he was simply updating the old myths. Gods who violated mortals were relics legitimizing his deeds. Zeus disguised himself as beasts. Caligula made the same violence bureaucratic. Attempts to resist were desperate and almost always fatal. Some women stole poison from palace gardens or elsewhere and swallowed it before they could be taken. Install poison from palace gardens or elsewhere and swallow it before they could be taken. Others disfigured themselves with knives or by burning their faces, hoping to make themselves useless to the system. But imperial physicians were skilled in restoring life and appearance. Many suicides were reversed and returned to the spectacle, often punished with extra public humiliations to deter others. Those deemed spoiled by mutilation were not spared either. Caligula declared that beauty was irrelevant to divine service, and sometimes used disfigured victims as part of the spectacle, arguing that ugliness made the ritual more pure. There was, in short, no true escape. Those who tried to flee were hunted down by informants and the imperial secret police dragged back for exemplary reprisals that often involved their whole family. The imperial archives swelled with entries, thousands upon thousands of records, each more detailed than the last. Every violation had a code, a category, a subcategory. There were forms to be filled, rules to be followed, hierarchies to be obeyed. The bookkeeping of atrocity became as exact as the ledgers of taxes and censuses. Caligula sometimes showed the ledger itself as an instrument of terror. He would read selections aloud in the Senate, selecting names and entries at random, forcing fathers and husbands to hear the clinical descriptions of what had been done to their wives and daughters. Entry 34:6. Julia, wife of Marcus Antonius. 4 hours, 6 participants, pregnancy confirmed. Public disgrace was part of the sentence. Participants, pregnancy confirmed. Public disgrace was part of the sentence. The emperor was creating collective memory of the trauma, making sure Rome would never forget what absolute power could do. The Praetorian Guard, the emperor's elite protectors, were not bystanders. They were embedded in the system, often rewarded with victims after imperial use. Participating in the rituals and guarding the hallways, they became complicit administrators of the emperor's will. One such man was Cassius Charia, a veteran soldier who had been mocked and humiliated by Caligula. The mocking was petty at first, taunts at his voice, orders to perform demeaning tasks, but humiliation piled on humiliation until something in Charia snapped. It wasn't an awakening of compassion so much as fury at his own debasement. On the night of January 24th, 41 CE, a final, brutal ceremony was staged, one Caligula intended as the peak of his public pageants. Wives of senators were pitted against gladiators in an auction-like competition, numbers called out like livestock, 20, 30, 40. Bodies move like robots, exhausted into submission. It was the last spectacle. The next day, as Caligula moved through an underground passage toward the theater, Charia and a group of Praetorian conspirators ambushed him. They stabbed him repeatedly, dozens of wounds, including a deliberate strike to the genitals, a symbolic reversal of the emperor's humiliations. The irony was bitter. The same men who had helped enable the system were the ones who ended the man at its center. Caligula's wife, Melonia Sasonia, was murdered shortly afterwards. His young daughter, Julia Drusilla, barely more than a child, was also killed. The conspirators intended to wipe out the dynasty entirely. Yet even with the emperor gone, the damage remained. The records, the pregnancies, the scars, the memories. Those could not be erased by blades. The new emperor, Claudius, declared a damnatio memoriae. Statues were knocked down, inscriptions were chiseled away, coins bearing Caligula's likeness were melted down. Official memory was censored, but paper and people remembered. The children born under the breeding program grew up without knowing their origins. Victims aged with secrets sealed inside them. Fathers, who had once held torches in state ceremonies, could never look their daughters in the eye again. Caligula's death removed a man, not the system he had built. Institutions have long afterlives. The manual for institutionalized cruelty, the registers, the powers, the legal precedents did not vanish with his corpse. It could be rewritten, reissued, adapted, without protective families, without laws to shield the vulnerable. New generations learned that certain evils survive beyond their creators, passing from one set of administrators to another like a contagious legacy. In the end, the echo of that night was the most damning testament. Men applauded an act of murder with the same hands that had once held torches for the rituals. The empire moved on outwardly, but inwardly the wounds remained. The children marked by the program, the women who carried their secrets to old age, and the men who justified their compliance all became part of a long, dark inheritance. Caligula had not simply indulged depravity. He had written the instructions for turning atrocity into governance, and manuals once written are never truly gone.